Pistos. It's from a word, patho, and it means, it has kind of the main meaning of to convince by argument. Faith, to convince by argument. That's the foundation on which our word rests. It's assent to evidence, patho is. So pistis means the idea to be persuaded, to be convinced, which shows that salvation is a matter of the mind, doesn't it? Argument, motives, blessings, things to think on, to be persuaded, to be convinced. I want to look at several biblical accounts of faith tonight, and if God help me, I want to see if maybe we can find a little notion or some little lesson in faith that might help each one of us and help us to be more familiar with faith and help us go to heaven. I've tried to not look at the ones that I usually use, but study a passage like H.D.'s taught us to emphasize and think and look at it and try to see some different. They're not astounding, they're not grandiose or anything, but they can be a little unnoticeable at times, and that which is seen all the time is seen not at all. It was interesting to me and encouraging that H.D. preached on the plan of salvation today, because those out there at Rockport, we've had a lot of that, talking to people. That sermon was so clear, wasn't it? How could you not understand it? It's just as clear as it could be. You could present that almost to every person out there, and they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand it. It's I guess the idea, like I talked to one person, I'm sure all the ones out there had the same experience. You know, how were you saved, you know? Well, I had this experience. I received Jesus in my heart as my own personal Savior. And I said, well, you know, we've all gone through this type thing before. But it ends up, do you remember Peter was asked that question, what must I do to be saved? What did he reply? Well, he said, repent, and you have to just accept the Lord. You have to accept the Lord. I said, let's look at that now, you know, repent, be baptized, every one of you. And what was the purpose? For remission of sins. And I said, yeah, that's right. And a little later in the conversation, you know, his main thing is just believe Jesus. Just believe Jesus. And I guess you can tell by now, I can't get used to that. I've only preached 45 years, but I cannot get used to people whose mind is all bleeped up to where they can only see what they were taught to see. You know, sometimes H.D. and I preach, and I know others of you are concerned and all about false doctrine and false teaching, and we think of how that can damn souls and that. But when you do have the direct experience, like so many of you do, and in Jamaica, of trying to actually teach souls, you begin to think, what would it be like if they were not already taught false doctrine and we didn't have to spend so much time unteaching. And it's very difficult to do. It's like a first impression. I believe, and I don't think I will hit it too far above, but in the books I've had on leadership and speech and, you know, how to interview, and another course that was offered there, the guy told me same thing. He's read, takes about 17, 26 times, something like that, for people to see you again, to undo that first impression you made on them. So it's very difficult for us when we go out to teach to undo what they've already been taught. And I don't know about you, but that makes me hate false doctrine all the more. It wastes time. Sometimes you can't reach them. Sometimes it's like welded into them. And like, for instance, on this one, of course, I do this because we don't have much time, but I didn't hold the Bible to him. I've done it many a time, but show me that, please. I was just wondering, where is that in the Bible? They don't know, and they don't know what to say. I did have one Baptist preacher one time in front of a bunch of students, and I'll say, well, Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I'll come in unto him and will sup with him and he with me. And it just takes a little bit to say, he was talking to Christians. That's not the plan of salvation there. Could you show me that? No, they can't. So it's one thing to think about false teachers, but, to live and try to undo the damage they do, and how much of a struggle it is even to get that one step across to them, that faith contains works of obedience. This guy, his same age I was, by the way, and I said, isn't it funny, sir, how we're so quick to believe things that we hear men say, and sometimes so slow to hear what God says. And we never get it. Yeah, I've noticed that. Well, I notice it all the time too, but that's the way it is. Faith, though, is a very important thing, and we had to get across many a time the idea that faith contains works of obedience, and put that in context, not works of law, not good works, works of obedience like Abraham had when he offered up his son Isaac upon the altar. And I think Jeremy or whomever did that had a real good way to clarify as quickly as possible the steps, the plan of salvation, and to go through those. And I sometimes like to tell people, we're trying to just be plain Christians. We are of a group of people who wanted to read the Bible as it just fell down out of heaven into their lap, and search the Scriptures daily whether these things are so. And these are the things you're seeing right there on that wall that they found out, and we see, that come before the word salvation in the Bible. Of course, we hope, and we got Bible studies and did a lot of good, and we have no idea how much good. We may be pleasantly and gratefully surprised, but we sow seeds. And to some who are just plain obstinate, God knows them. And the gospel, like Paul said, we're a savor to some of life unto life, and to others to death unto death. And God's watching all of this. Recall good King Asa. The kingdom had split under Rehoboam. He's the third from that. And he reigned 41 years, and we call him good. He did basically that which is right, but there's still things we can watch out for in his life. But he put down the Sodomites, which our nation right now is not very much in the mood to do, to be well thought of. He tore down the idols. His mother, Maacah, had put up an idol in a grove, Asherah, and he put her down as queen mother, no more. He built cities and walls. Evidently, it's a virtue to protect your people. And he had an army of 280,000 people. Then, after about 15 years or so, he learned Zerah, the Ethiopian, is coming after him with a 1,000,000-man army. Now, I don't think the Bible's exaggerating. 300 chariots. What do you do? Before the battle, Asa prayed. And the battle was set in array at the valley of Zephathah. He prayed to God and said the truth. It's nothing with you, God, to save with many, or them that have no power at all. Well, God said he heard his prayer. But Asa continued in that prayer and said, let not man prevail against thee. They often try to do that and have to learn. And in our generation too, we all have to learn, and we have to see people around us learn that they're nothing but men. They're not God. 2 Chronicles 14, verse 11 through 13. Asa smote the Ethiopians with his army, and of course God doing it. Then Judah pursued that 1,000,000-man army, what was left of them, unto Gerah, and they just carried away much spoil. And at that moment, on the way back, the spirit of Azariah, who is the son of Oded, the prophet, but the spirit of Azariah, the spirit came upon Azariah, I should say. Hear ye me, O Asa, God says, and all Judah and ye Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you're with them. And if you seek him, you will find him. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. The world here, the Judah and Benjamin, was a long time, Azariah continues, without a teaching priest and without the law. And when they were in trouble, they did turn unto Jehovah. They sought unto him and was found of him. In those times, there was no peace. There was great vexations, he says, and nation destroyed nation, and city destroyed city. And God vexed everyone with all adversity. So be strong, therefore, and let not your hands be weak. In other words, continue on. Asa heard that prophecy and a prophecy also of Oded, and he took courage and he put away the idols. He renewed the altar of Jehovah. And even Ephraim and Manasseh and Simeon of the northern kingdom just fell away down there to him because they knew God was with him. They fell away in abundance, it says, and we did mention what he had to do with his own mother, put her down from the throne, idolatry. He brought dedicated things to the temple. He organized temple worship like David did. And then late in his life, the king of the north, Baasha, who usurped the throne, by the way, and came against him in his 35th year. Asa reigned 41 years, recall. And at that point, after all of this, Asa chips and tears away all the gold on the temple and makes a treasure, sends it to Ben-Hadad of Syria, and says, break your league with Baasha and help me. And he did, received it. So now comes in the father, Hanani, and the prophet. And he says, because you have relied on the Syrians, the king of Syria, and on them, the host of Syria will escape your hands. And then he reminded him, what did you do with the Ethiopians when you trusted unto me? And don't you know, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro through the earth, beholding that which is good and that which is evil. So how did Asa respond? The one who had relied on Jehovah for so long in his life, here toward the end of his life, what did he do? He was wroth, and that means fired up anger, hot anger. And he was at wroth with the prophet Oded, and he put him in prison. And in a rage, he oppressed the people, I guess some that took up for the prophet and all. Then in the 39th year of his life, he was struck in the feet with some disease, we can guess. But nevertheless, he was diseased in his feet. And it says he sought unto physicians and not unto God. And he died a couple of years later. Overall, though, he was a good king. Now, it could be to our benefit to think of these lessons that we often do in these stories. And with him, prayer is very important and does things. And there's nothing too big for God to save any which way he wants to. And God is an encouraging God and comforted Asa, and we could go on and on. But we might profit just from this lesson that I'm sure have seen. But faith is going, in you and me, it's going to be tested right up to the very end. A man can be a faithful gospel preacher for 30, 40 years and fall into sin and destroy the people he saved. It's a horrible thing. I don't want to see it again. And an elder can serve as an elder, and we think strong, and toward the end of his life, it hadn't really been there, or it fell away, or something, and he just doesn't care and goes astray and hurts the church. I had an elder tell me not long ago, one of my friends, an elder up at Southwest, he said, we all learned a lot from him. He's okay, but he's got a blockage, and we went through his health and all, and he's very old, in his 80s now. I knew him when he had a filling station at San Marcos, and I was a little boy, wasn't a member of the church at all. Nevertheless, he said, I've learned a lot from him, some of the elders up there. And this is not whom you think, but I remember this a little while back. I learned from him to be kind of silent and to be quiet. I told him, I just don't understand how you could learn from him to be quiet and silent. And he, I know there were times, I saw plenty of them. I told him, I said, you remember one time, you wasn't even an elder at that time probably, but this woman wanted us the church and the elders, and they wanted me to meet with them also because I preached at that time. But anyway, to meet, and she wanted them to, the whole church, withdraw from her husband. And so we all go to the library, and she said, you come in too. So I went in, sat down, and I'm among these good, godly men. And she says, he sat there very meek and quiet. You know why later. But anyway, she said, I want y'all to withdraw from him. Because just at that moment, this elder interrupted and said, I'm going to tell you something, little missy. Not any infringement on anyone present here, but it's almost those words, I think. I want to tell you something. You open your mouth, we're just about to withdraw from you. You ought to leave him alone. She stood up and said, y'all go out first. Gentlemen, ladies are supposed to go out before gentlemen, and y'all are not gentlemen, and that's it, And I learned about her. She's just, I don't know what happens to people. Their mind is kind of burned, and they see what's not there, and sometimes you can be a little crazy. But she was on him like Guy Wood's wife. You may not know this, but she was so vicious. She tried to lock up his library so he couldn't study and get court orders against it. The man went through a lot. You don't know what's going to happen in life, and it's always good to pray. But nevertheless, this is good, a good thought here that we've got to steel ourselves right down to the bitter end to have faith. Be a good example of faith, an example of strength to ourselves, our family, to the church, and for our behalf ourselves. Well, we might profit from that lesson that God gave us. It's tested to the end. There's never a time when things are finished in this life. We never relinquish the need for faith, and it's never terminal how we can use faith in our life. And it's a good while before, this good king fell from lack of faith. By the way, I think I should make a little side note here. It's not wrong to go to physicians. We know that if you read the whole Bible, physicians are good. Jesus said, they that are whole have no need of a physician, but they that are sick do. And that's, of course, Matthew 9:12. But we've got to think of things like physicians and other things we rely on more as tools of him who is really behind it all. And we trust God. And then God uses whatever tools he wants to. It may be a physician, it may be this or that, according to our needs. That makes me think so many. I'll go into one more little example. When Absalom was trying to take the kingdom away from David, and David fled, immediately knew he better with all the household of the kingdom around him. And they get to the top of the hill, someone runs up and says, Ahithophel is with the conspiracy. He's taken up with your son, Absalom. David prayed a little prayer right there on the spot. Lord, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Ahithophel, it says in the Bible, was the counselor of David that was almost like an oracle of God. When he spoke, everyone was through. That's Ahithophel. Found out just recently in the Bible that he's the father-in-law of Bathsheba, but nevertheless, he was a great counselor, and people did what he said. About that time after the prayer, a friend of David's, Hushai, who was at the court also, came and wanted to help. He said, no, you go back, join with Absalom, and defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. So he does, as the king told him to. Ahithophel gave his advice to Absalom. Let me have the men right now before they get too far, and I'll come and I'll take him, and the whole kingdom will turn around to you. And so they said, okay, what do you say, Hushai? That sounded so great, and it really was the best advice. But Hushai said, the counsel of Ahithophel is not good this time. You know that David has the mighty men around him, and they're angry like a bear robbed of her cubs, and that they will fight in ways that we've seen them before. It'd be best to gather all of Israel together and then go up against him. And then if he get in a city, and boy, he made it sound so glorious. I did, because it says the counsel was of Jehovah. He wanted to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. In other words, he wanted to answer David's prayer, and he did. They all said, Hushai's advice is the best, and it really wasn't. Ahithophel probably was so wise, he saw that. We oftentimes wonder if that's why he just got on his ass and rode back home and hanged himself. I doubt it was out of pride. It could have been just pride that his advice wasn't taken, or it could have been He saw the handwriting on the wall. Let's get it over with. We're going to lose. Nevertheless, you use the best you have. David picked up 5 smooth stones, not just one or nothing. And so we use physicians. We can use gold. We can use counselors. We can use our friends. But faith remains to be in God. And these other things are just minor little tools or something you reach for or something you take up. God is the key to it all, no matter what. I'm just wondering tonight, as I have about myself, can you think you can find some ways that applies maybe in your life that you need that faith to the very end, and it has to be in God? Nothing else. Your first thoughts is, I'm not going to call so-and-so. I'm not going to. First thoughts is prayer to God. And though faith is the victory. I want to remember another good king, Hezekiah. In 2 Kings chapter 16, chapter 18, and 2 Chronicles 29. His father was Ahaz, who was evil, the one that Isaiah gave that prophecy about the virgin birth to. And he was vexed by Pekah of the northern kingdom and Rezin of Syria. And so he takes all the gold off the temple everywhere you can find gold and sends it up to the Syrians at Damascus and says, break your league with Pekah and attack them. And so really he didn't send it to, he sent it to Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser. Nevertheless, Tiglath-Pileser came down, took a bunch of their cities. They broke off the conflict. And then people were angry with Ahaz. He died. And his son, though, Hezekiah, became king. Yeah, a good king, one of the best, if not take two. He's the second best, maybe in my estimation. But nevertheless, he watched Israel that was carried into captivity by Assyria. But he did as David did. He broke false images. He was a little like Josiah also. And he prospered everywhere he went. Then Sennacherib of Assyria came to put all the countries in tribute on the way down to fight with Egypt. And they sends Rabshakeh over to Jerusalem to try to get them to surrender. And if you want to read an arrogant guy, you can read about Sennacherib. And he's sent to Jerusalem with Tartan and Rabsaris, demanded surrender. Don't you let Hezekiah get you to trust in Egypt. And then he'll say, don't you let Hezekiah make you trust in Jehovah. My master will give you 2,000 horses right now, if you can find the men to sit on them, to fight with. And if you trust in the Lord, see, he had his scouts out. He knew what all was going on down in Judah. He had the spies and pretty good intelligence. If you trust in the Lord, isn't it the Lord that Hezekiah tore down the high places of his? Well, he didn't understand that was a good thing Hezekiah did in the sight of God. But don't let Hezekiah make you trust in Jehovah. Where's the God? And he mentions the city-states, some of them. As he came down from Assyria, he just took everything of Hamath and Orpad and Sepharvaim and Hena and Ivah. Where are all of those? And Hezekiah had sent to talk with them, or to listen to them, Eliakim of the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the recorder. And they said, speak to us in the Syrian language, really Aramaic, and we understand it, so the people are not listening to all of this. No, I came to talk to these people that are going to, and he gets so vulgar, I'm not going to kind of say what he said. Even though it's in the Bible, our sensibilities maybe are a little beyond that. It might distract more than it'd teach, and I don't want to go into all of that. But Hezekiah had sent Eliakim, like we said, and Shebna and Joah. And they brought word to Hezekiah. He rent his clothes. But then the servants of Hezekiah, after they said, speak in the Syrian language, got such an arrogant answer, as I said. But it says the people answered not a word. They just stood quietly and watched the scene. Hearken not to Hezekiah. I'll take you to a land that is like your own, and you can have vines and houses and all of that. When they returned, Hezekiah just said, go to Isaiah the prophet and ask him. Say it's a day of trouble and rebuke and contumely, which means the idea of sarcasm they've had to put up with, insult, revilement. It's that type of day, Isaiah. The children have come to the birth. and there's not strength to bring forth. Well, Isaiah said, be not afraid of their words, God says. I will put a spirit in him. He'll hear things, and he'll go away by the way he came. Then Rabshakeh gets back to where he was fighting at Libnah, Sennacherib, and he finds out that he's gone on in his warring, not Lachish, but Libnah now. He's at Libnah, and he's going on down to fight with Egypt. But Tarhaka of Egypt has come out with another 1,000,000-man army. And they do defeat him. Tarhaka gets away, but it now mentions other city kingdoms. Rabshakeh says, where's the gods of Gozan and Haran and Reseph and the children of Israel? And he mentioned before, Sepharvaim and Hena and Iva. Their gods couldn't deliver them. Well, there was evidently a written letter given. Hezekiah took the written letter, went to the temple, spread it out before Jehovah, and prayed again. And he praised God. That's the way he started off his prayer. God, who sitteth above the cherubim, who made heaven and earth, incline thine ears unto thee, and open thine eyes, that thou might see our plight, and hear the words of Sennacherib. And Hezekiah said, Rabshakeh did speak the truth. There's no gods that could stand before him, because they're idols. But thou art the God that made heaven and earth. Save us. Their gods were stones. Save us, that all kingdoms might know that thou art Jehovah alone. God answered through Isaiah, the prophet, because. Here's a reason. Because. We're going to hear it. Because thou prayed unto me, I heard thee. And the virgin daughter of Israel is going to laugh at Sennacherib and shake her head at him. And he goes on and describes the downfall that Sennacherib will have. And that night, God sent an angel out to do his work. And we call him a death angel. He killed 185,000 Assyrians that night. And when others woke up, they were all dead men the next morning. Some way God did it his way. You know, the Battle of Waterloo, they talk about how many men lost their lives that day, that one day, 50,000. There was maybe 100,000 Romans slain by Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae. 185,000 dead people lying there that morning. What would it be like? Of course, Sennacherib's scribes wrote a glorious thing. He didn't say he conquered Jerusalem, though. He didn't tell all the other details. But he speaks to Rabshakeh, you tell him. He, then Sennacherib, they've defied God. They've exalted their voice above him. They've lifted up their eyes above Jehovah, even the Holy One of Israel. And so God talks of what he had done long ago, and I am the one that brought that to pass, God says. And therefore fortified cities were weak. I know thy raging and thy arrogancy. And then he gave some promises to Israel. They'll not come to Jerusalem, build a wall, or dig up a wall, or shoot an arrow. Well, the 185,000 were slain that night. And he went home. He had two sons, and I don't know the reason. I can't really imagine it, but there's a reason. But Adramelech and Sharezer killed him. As he was worshiping, Sennacherib was worshiping in the house of Israel, his god. Oh, I don't know. If I looked at that, as a preacher, I'd surely want to preach about how faith is the victory and how important prayer is. And that much faith is required later on. And that Hezekiah did pray because there's always trouble out there. And you know, Peter tried to tell us his way. Be watchful, be sober. Your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion. We can hear a lot of that now on Discovery Channel. Like a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Well, today, though, I just wanted to focus on one letter, and one lesson. I think it's a little bittersweet, but that's the way God's scheme of redemption is set up. For his purpose is to weed out, to bring in, to rarefy, to make beautiful the saints that will be with him in heaven, to strengthen them so they can go to heaven. It's God's way. And we'll start with all this old saying. It's true in a lot of different contexts. If you raise your head, you're going to get shot at. That can be in a context like sometimes even regrettably in the Lord's church. You can have a lady that does something and the sniping at her. And even James can do something and they'll snipe at him. And if Jeremy gets something going, snipe at him. You haven't heard it? I haven't heard a word, Jeremy. Relax. But nevertheless, that's the way it is. But in this case, Satan notices. God said, where have you been? Well, walking up and down, to and fro in the earth. Have you beheld my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth. That he's a good man, does good, and turned away from evil. Yeah, but you build a hedge around him. You just let me take away what he has. He'll curse you to his face. Now that, I think, it's true, and it happened, but it happened by way of our example. That's what's going on with the devil, which means slanderer. He's trying to get permission to do this and that with you. Simon, Satan asked to have thee, that he might sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you, that your faith fail not. What I'm trying to say is, yes, you want to be good. You want to go on that upward way, and you might even get on your knees and pray. God, use me howsoever thou would, as a young person. Well, expect that you're going to have some temptation, trials. And God says to Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? Well, Satan got his way. Job had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, 7 sons and 3 daughters. The Sabaeans came and took away the oxen and the she-asses that were eating together, killed all the servants. One was left to come and tell Job of the calamity. And then fire came down out of heaven, destroyed Job's 7,000 sheep. One servant was not burned up. And as the other one was speaking, he showed up to tell Job the bad news. And while he was speaking, another came in and said, the Chaldeans in 3 bands have taken away 3,000 of the camels. And while he was yet speaking, another one comes in and says, your sons and your daughters were all eating together in a house, and a great wind came out of the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house, and they're all dead. And of course, we hoped that we would be like Job and say, Jehovah giveth and Jehovah taketh away. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. And in all of that, all I'm trying to say is Hezekiah did very well before Jehovah. But he opened the house of the doors that Ahab had closed. He repaired them. He put the Levites in order. He made the 10th come in to take care of them and the priest. He made a covenant between God and the people. He organized the worship. He offered sacrifices in abundance and had a Passover that was not seen since the days of Moses. And he prayed and he praised God and offered unto God. He kept up that 10th to keep up the priest. And so what happens? It's part of God's redemptive system. I don't know how to say it, but good men like Job and Hezekiah, and if you want to be good, you're going to get shot at. The evil one has his fiery darts, and expect trouble. So all I can say is what Peter said, I guess. I couldn't improve on be watchful. If you're trying to be very good, be sober. If you say, God, just use me any way you want to use me, well, your adversary, the devil, is going to slander you. That's what devil means, slanderer. And whom, Peter says, withstand steadfastly in your faith, knowing the same sufferings are occurring in your brethren who are in the world. 1 Peter 5:8. So Jehovah blessed the latter end of Job more than the beginning. He had double all the livestock that he had. He had 7 more sons, 3 daughters. These daughters are described as the most beautiful in all that part of the country. He lived another 140 years in peace. We also notice Jesus said the seed fell on the rocky ground. You remember Luke 8? And it only endured for a little while, but in a time of tribulation or persecution, it withered away. You just can't let that happen to you. Matthew 13:21. To be forewarned is forearmed. The Bible arms us to what to expect. In the world you have tribulation. Jesus said, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. I'm greater than the world, John 16:33. And not only so, but we also, Paul said, rejoice in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation worketh steadfastness, steadfastness, approvedness, and approvedness, hope. Again, Romans 5, verse 3. Through many tribulations, we must enter into the kingdom of God, Acts 14:22. And many are the afflictions of the righteous, but Jehovah delivereth him out of them all. Psalm 34, verse 19. Is there anyone out here tonight? I don't know. I have no idea. God knows everything, but I know nothing, and less all the time. Any of you say, well, I don't have all that persecution and all that. I don't feel that. Don't you wish you did? Don't you wish you could? There are times you've trained yourself to be silent when you should be speaking up. I don't care where you are, if it's with your best friend, even your wife, in front of a group of your favorite people, in an elders deacons meeting or in an elders meeting. Silence is, like Linda Parker said, I remember, but silence is not always golden. Sometimes it's just plain yellow. And we don't see it that way, I know, and we'll never admit it, but we don't want to speak up because it's awkward and we might get hurt. And so we don't like what we hear, but we don't speak up. And there's many other ways besides speaking up. We win in this life by words. I saw a man get after a young preacher who was standing for truth alongside of me, and he said, well, this elder really chewed me out for talking and for speaking up and trying to take up for what was right and all of that, and I guess I'm going to be quiet tonight. And I said, well, he's wrong. You don't win by shutting up and sitting there like a pot plant. You have to speak out. Well, good, nice, Christian-like, but we win by words of Christians who are encouraged because of the faith they have. But in the world you have tribulation. Well, I might look at another one here. I'll encourage you, though, move on, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. There's so much other things that we could say, but we do have a merciful God. He checks out our trials, our temptations, and if you want to be on the other side, there's nothing I can do or say. I can say, he who has ears to hear, let him hear, but that's about it. That's what Jesus did. Let's take a glance for a moment at another one in the Sermon on the Mount. Lay not up for yourself treasures upon the earth, where moth and rust doth consume, and thieves break through and steal, but lay up treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth consume, and thieves do not break through nor steal. Because where your treasures are, there will your heart be also. You can get addicted to this type of thing, used to that type of thing, and forget things far more important, like Martha didn't understand Mary at all. Mary chose the good part. And one thing was needful, and it was that, to hear the word of God. The lamp of the body is the eye, Jesus said. But if thine eye be evil, thy body shall be full of darkness. But if thy eye be single, which means clear according to its purpose, in some contexts it's used not stingy. If thy eye be single, thy body shall be full of light. And if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is the darkness? You cannot serve God and mammon. Money, Aramaic for money. Therefore I say unto you, be not anxious for your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, nor yet for your body, what you'll put on. We're concerned about things like that. We just don't know it. It's with us maybe TVs and automobiles and other things that are bills that we have to pay for. Is not the life more than the body? And behold the birds of the heaven, that they sow not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. And he goes on, and consider the lilies of the field, how they toil not, neither do they reap nor gather into barns. Your Father feeds the birds, and he makes them better than Solomon could make the lilies of the field and all of that. But the main thought is, who by being anxious can add 1 cubit unto the measure of his life? What does it do? What's the good of it? Being anxious, add 1 cubit. And why are you anxious concerning raiment, so forth, and food, and the birds are fed by God, and we see that every day. So he says, after all these things, do the Gentiles seek? Your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of all these things. But seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Be not therefore anxious for the morrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Matthew 6, 19 through 34. Now there's a lot of essential things there we could talk about and spend time on that would be useful. Priorities, first the kingdom is important. Where do you want your heart to be? We could talk about light and darkness seeping into our life. I just want to focus on one thing that crosses my mind, and maybe it'll be useful to you, maybe to me more than I know, but it seems to me that faith involves every nook and corner of our life, and probably a lot more so than we know. God, who knows 100 billion trillion stars by name, sees every little facet of your life, every little struggle, every failure, every step forward, every 2 steps back, every thought. God sees all of that. And so your eye has to be single, clear. It's like something folded rightly. It has to be clear. Don't worry about eating, drinking, apparel. There's a great example here, I think, that God cares about what we say is the very lowest things in our life. I don't know. I probably don't know what I'm saying, but it seems to me if I could, I want to start trying to watch for small opportunities for faith. David Lipscomb said, I never bought a pair of shoes. I didn't pray about it. That got me to thinking. And a lot more now. Shoes are so expensive. There's a lot less expensive things to think about. But godliness is thinking of God in every circumstance, every little decision. Young people, if I were you, and I can't tell you what to do, and for some of you it's no hope, you're like me, or like I was. I'd pray about tests. I'd pray about them before you study for them, that you study rightly. I'd pray that you can somehow get along with that teacher. Young people, I'd pray about every peer relationship I had. God knows things you don't know. Sometimes you may have a good brother or sister. My brother came to me about a lady one time before I met the best there was, the lady of my heart, and said, what are you doing with her? She's a good person, and we have fun together. And he made a statement, and this is why you have brothers, I guess, older sisters. You don't see her when she's not around you. I do. That was enough for me. I broke it up and got away. Godliness is thinking of God in every circumstance. Can you think of the littlest in your life? Pray about it. Goals that you set. Football games, nobody gets hurt, and especially you don't get hurt. The grades that you make, that somehow everything will work out for good. I one time had scruples and didn't pray. Pre-qual day in the Marine Corps, it's a big deal, I shot expert. It's big and offers a lot for you and gets them off your back. You don't get hit if you shoot expert. You don't get kicked and stuff like that. But it came qualification day just the next day, and I thought, that's not right to qualify for expert again and all that. I got marksman. It took me years and years to get expert again. I've often thought, I wish I'd have prayed about that. Maybe I could have gotten expert in boot camp like I wanted to. Jeremy did. I wish I would have done that, but I attribute it to learning a lesson there. Everything that's important to you is important to God. And if it's important to you and it shouldn't be, God takes care of that also when you lean on Him. Pray about getting along on the job. Pray about getting the right mate in life. And inner improvement. And God, give me wisdom to make every decision one that's toward Thee and one that Thou would have me make, not one for the pleasures of this world. Trust God in general about His care in His daily life. Be ye free from the love of money. Paul said, for Himself has said, I will never leave thee, neither will I in any wise forsake thee. Hebrews 13:5. And then Paul said, if God's for us, who can be against us? He that spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all, how shall He not also with Him freely give us all things? And I'm sure I have to move on here. Oh my. Well, let me do it just a little bit. I just have to say something about these 3 Hebrew children. They came to Babylon, and they were supposed to learn the language. They were to be wise and cunning and no blemish on them. They're going to serve as cupbearers and all of that. And first of all, they don't eat the dainties of the king to be defiled. They might have had in that food, swine, and there could have been even rabbits was unclean to them, and catfish, and they're not going to do that. And they got permission, and they ate vegetables, pulse, something that grows, the word means. But nevertheless, that was an act of faith, wasn't it? We admire them for that. But then later on, Nebuchadnezzar up in Babylon builds a god. And it's 60 cubits tall and made of gold on the plain of Dura. Now you wonder where the plain of Dura is. I'm very certain it's either in Babylon or it's not in Babylon. I'm very confident of that. Nevertheless, he made that at 60 cubits is 87 feet 5 inches, 87.5 feet. And it's covered in gold at least. And there was going to be the sound of all kinds of music. There was going to be a sackbut, and there was going to be the harp and the flute, and it just goes on and on naming. And at that sound, everybody within earshot, it didn't sound like they were going to have a minuet. It sounded like it's going to be more of a detonation, of all those kinds of instruments. But nevertheless, at that you had to bow. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and really it should be pronounced, I understand Shadrach. But nevertheless, they wouldn't bow down to it. And of course, jealousy has an old age. Some came and said, there's some Hebrews that won't bow down, and Nebuchadnezzar liked them, so he gave them another chance. Is it true you won't bow down to my God? Look, it's 87.5 feet tall, and it's covered in gold, and there's a furnace at the end of it if you don't. It's almost, how do you say you're not going to bow down? Well, anyway, they said that they won't. He said, now, we're going to do that, and all these instruments are going to play once again. And you're going to hear, and all the nobles were there, and they were to bow down also. And he was in a rage and a fury. But when you hear the cornet, the sackbut, the dulcimer, the cymbals, and it mentions a lot more, you bow down. But if you don't, that very hour, you'll be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Well, they said, and who's the God that shall deliver you out of my hands? And of course, you know what they said. If it be so, our God's able to deliver us out of thy hands. But if not, we'll still not worship your God, and I'll fall down to that idol. Well, that, to a king like Nebuchadnezzar, rage and fury and all that, I don't think that does the job at all. You make that fire 7 times hotter, and it was so hot the people that brought them up, the men that did to throw them into the furnace, they were killed. I suspect maybe the heat did it. But nevertheless, they were killed also. Nebuchadnezzar jumps up and said, didn't we cast 3 men in? I see 4 walking around. There's no hurt to them. And the 4th one looks like the Son of God. Actually, the American Standard is supposed to be more literal, and that's the way it reads, the Son of God. Well, he might have thought there was one son. He looked so brilliant or whatever. Well, anyway, come out, he shouts at them. They come out and they're inspected, and they weren't hurt. And their clothes were not hurt, their tunics, coats. And their hair was not singed, and there wasn't even the smell of smoke on them. And so finally Nebuchadnezzar says, if anyone say anything bad about the God of these Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he'll be cut to pieces and his house will become a dunghill. Well, in all of that, what do you get out of that? We could talk about so many good things. It reminds us of so much. But I was just thinking of one thing, about these little things every day we have in our life. If we can take advantage of them, they build us up and strengthen us. If we can, he that is faithful in little is faithful also in much. If we want to be, when the time comes for the real dire circumstances, God gives us plenty of opportunity to know and to know what we can do. And we build up for it. Like David took a lion and a bear down. And Samson, the Lord began to move him, show him his strength before all. So we ought to take advantage of our life. Tomorrow you can get up and start, if you're observant, and not, what is that thing called? A zombie? If you're not a zombie, you can see things in your life, and you can sort of take advantage of them. Overcome. And so you can be like them in that. So we just looked tonight at how faith is tested to the very end, and how if you're going to grow or raise your head, you're going to get turmoil. You'll get shot at. Satan does that. And that God's totally involved in every inch of your life. More, I think we would be surprised, but I could document so many things in the Bible along that line that we'd begin to say, yeah, probably far more than we could imagine. And fourthly, look for these little opportunities to stretch your faith and overcome and develop those habits. And then when the big things come, in our eyes big, you'll be ready for them. You know, again, he that hath, to him shall be given. And he that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he thinketh he hath. I wonder if anyone needs any help tonight. If you want to obey the gospel, you must believe that Jesus is the Christ, Son of God. Repent of your sins. That's a change of mind with a view you're going to change your life. All your past sins. Confess that Jesus is Lord, and be baptized for the remission of sins. Matthew 10:32 and Acts 2:38. And there may be a Christian that needs our prayers and our strength. Anything we can do to help you, please come as we stand and sing.